Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. Now, you guys know I really talk a lot about reproductive justice on this show because it is fundamental in order to have a functioning society that we all have bodily autonomy. And because of that, I've done a lot of work in the past with organizations like Planned Parenthood and Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. I'm currently actually a board member on. But people, when they hear that word, those words, Planned Parenthood, I think a lot of people talk about abortion rights. But what gets lost in this debate is the broader role about how these health centers are acting in our communities, from cancer screenings to STI testing to contraception and gender affirming care, as well as preventative health care. So, as we're seeing these draconian policies taking shape at the federal level and then trickling down to the state level, more clinics are closing, abortion bans are spreading across parts of this country, and many Americans just do not fully understand the ripple effect that these changes are having on their entire healthcare system, especially for low-income patients, rural communities, LGBTQ individuals, and people of color, as well as those who are already facing access to care. So, today, I'm excited to have Stephanie Phillips, the new CEO of Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania, joining me. We're going to be talking about the future of reproductive health care, the importance of gender-affirming services, what reproductive justice looks like through the lenses of race, class, and gender, and the policy battle that could shape access to Pennsylvania's future and beyond. And we're going to do it all in 20 minutes, you guys. It's going to be easy, no problem. But most importantly, we're going to be discussing and exploring a question that affects far more people than I think any of us realize. And what happens to our communities when access to healthcare disappears? What brought you to Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania? Why did you want to take the helm of this organization, especially in this incredibly difficult time to be in the area of reproductive care?
Sure. I think a lot of my friends have asked me that very question, right? Why now? Why this? And I've been my entire career. Even back before that, working at Russ Felter, my mom, nurse, I grew up knowing that very early and created a lot of good trouble in my really felt good. But I ran my clinic for Planned Parenthood in 2000. Did abortion and family planning, very high volume clinic in Syracuse, New York. Then, throughout my career, I grew into different more senior roles and eventually ended up at the national office. That's Planned Parenthood Federation of America, responding to the decision on a national level. I had the whole center of I was there on the ground with clinics, holding staff, following patients, just really, really heartbreaking stuff for all of us, right? This was the lives. It is what we had all geared for, and seeing it happen in the course of my career, just so devastating. But I think, also former EMS, while people run away from fires, I run them. And so I feel incredibly privileged to be leading at the time.
So let's talk a little bit about Planned Parenthood itself in the context that I do think a lot of people associate it with abortion care. And listen, I am not shy to talk about my support for abortion care. Abortion is essential health care, and I think we need to stand 10 toes down on that. But it does so much more for our communities beyond abortion care services. Can you talk about some of the misnomers around what people may not understand about the work of Planned Parenthood?
Oh, sure. I think, we could spend the whole 20 minutes just talking about that, right? I think, I say, of course, we are provide abortion care. We talk about abortion care often because it is so stigmatized and because it is so politicized, right? It's very important for us to make sure that we are front and center and don't back away from that care. And also, I view Planned Parenthood as a true safety net provider. I think one of the little facts about us here at Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania is my team started a food pantry for our patients who have food insecurity. So when we think about who we are to communities, that question is so much bigger and deeper. Simply the services we and you named so many of them: cervical screening, breast exam, gender affirming care is a core service. ensure that people are armed, especially for folks who may not have great access, right? I also provide menopause care because we know that care is difficult to get. And I think ultimately, for me, it's about, and I hope I speak for all of us in Pennsylvania, it is about making sure there to catch folks that
Mhm.
not serve. And we want to make sure that who has felt unseen or validated by those systems can come to us for that. I think the other thing that I hear and have throughout my career that I realized is Planned Parenthoods broadly also often offer prenatal support. So if
Mhm.
if they're pregnant and they want to continue their pregnancy, we will prescribe them prenatal vitamins. We will up to care. I always would say, I've experienced a lot of anti violence throughout my career. I have experienced quite a bit of hostility. And I always say we have helped more people pregnancy than any crisis pregnancy has. So I think that is a little note Planned Parenthoods for sure.
I think that's a really important thing to talk about is that this is about whole body person care at any stage or phase of your reproductive journey. And that's something that I think, there is so much disinformation and propaganda around this space. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that everyone just wants you to be able to choose the path that you want to be on if you come to Planned Parenthood and then find supportive structure there for yourself. If you're just joining us, I'm Natalie Bensavanga. I'm with Stephanie Phillips, the new CEO of Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. So, one of the concerns that I've heard from a lot of people, Stephanie, that connect with me is that they just don't seem to fully understand the broader consequences of these clinics closing, of these abortion restrictions. I mean, we're literally hearing and seeing in the news, people are bleeding out. Women are bleeding out in parking lots. Doctors are afraid to perform DNCs when the embryo is not viable because the woman isn't at the point of no return, basically, in terms of their own bodily health. Can you talk about, in your experience, what you're seeing as a long term repercussion to these clinics shuttering their doors or these environments being made so hostile that they cannot seem to function anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that is something we've talked about in the reproductive so long. Where what happens when we are restricted from being in communities? What happens when we close our doors? And I think it's one of those situations where folks put away their umbrella and their form because they're not getting wet, right? It's hard to define or see, have folks connect with something that is hypothetical or because so many of us have lived with this access our entire life, right? We're generations removed potentially in a lot of places, not all, certainly,
Mhm.
a lot of places from not having access to this care. But we know the research shows that access to sexual and reproductive health care broadly, including abortion services, makes our community healthier over maternal mortality rates go precipitously when not access to abortion care. There's not access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care for exactly those reasons I named earlier. So much more sexual care providers, not but Planned Parenthood also does so much more for these than simply that one kind of dimension of care. And that is linked to the ability or desire of doctors and to be in our community. If we don't have clinicians or physicians provide care, they're scared for their licenses and their livelihoods and scared of prosecution. They're not going to live in our communities or serve in our community broadly or deeply. And so all of these pieces are interconnected and on a deeper level. So we can use reproductive justice to inform, but that's not our main, lane, right?
Mhm.
New voices for reproductive, they are out there doing work
Yeah.
and that we're amplifying them. And also, reproductive justice is intimately tied to that question around how our community is impacted. We is the we overall school performance. Planned Parenthoods and other sexual and reproductive health providers are reducing overall economic stability increases. This has all been researched very over years, and not just here in the US, across the world. We know this to be true. And so by providing sexual and reproductive health care, we're really engaged for the overall health of our community across all various dimensions.
So if we know this to be true, what is this about, Stephanie? Then what is this about, right? Like, it's like I hear you, I couldn't agree more, but it's not really about opinion. This is documentation, this is statistical analysis, this is research over decades. All of the things that you shared are true, right? When we take care of our reproductive lives, we then build healthier families and communities and livelihoods for everyone. All of these things are intertwined, from economics to personal happiness, right? All of this stuff. So what the hell is this really about? Because I think that's at the core where sometimes we tiptoe around the truth of it, but there's just a lot of, it feels, uh, patriarchal violence at the center, white supremacist violence at the center of these conversations. So when you're talking to people that don't align in this value system, how do you talk to them in a way that can at least try to center humanity in the conversation?
That's such a great question. And I will say, I think that's a question we've been grappling with in the world broadly for, I mean, as long as I've been in it, right? And the answer is fundamentally when we're having those conversations, if we think of this as a one side is having an ideological and the other side is having a public health conversation. And I think
Mm.
it's called to thread that needle. We're talking completely different frameworks. So philosophically, completely different approaches. But I think where we really have opportunity is in that space of grabbing people visceral way. I
Mhm.
had folks in my life who did not agree with what I or were very staunchly, anti-abortion. And I would say to them, I've had patients who had 12 children
Mm.
whose partners would allow them to be on birth control. And this is when I ran my clinics. And what am I supposed to say to that person? What would you say to that person if you had me up? And I think that kind of humanizing factor, not humanizing patients, but also humanize us as abortion providing staff members, I think can go a long way to making those conversations productive because part of the reason our opposition historically been so successful is because they're making these very visceral messaging, I'll call them ploys, right? Pro messaging ploys that grab people. And I think if we're coming back saying the research, the data shows so many of us find that impactful, but I an entirely different framework than saying, here's the real and cost of what you're.
Yeah, and it's a broad conversation. I think that's an important point to make, that when you're tugging at people's emotions, the messaging doesn't actually have to be based in anything other than that. And I think that is a problem when you're trying to counter it from a completely different framework. How do you then fall into that space? I remember reading this book during George W., his first term, and someone wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. And I love this book, and I use it a lot when I talk about these things, because at the time I think the Republicans were getting very good with messaging. And don't think of an elephant. What's the first thing you think of? Is an elephant, right? So it's this idea of how we're framing a conversation. And one of the examples was, if you frame a conversation when you're discussing abortion as, or reproductive justice, as pro-life or pro-choice, the minute someone says, well, I'm pro-choice, not pro-life, and here's why, you've already lost, because in the framework, who isn't pro-life, right? So this constant, how do we reframe a conversation so that we don't walk into sort of a philosophical pitfall without even starting, is a real challenge. And so I think it's important, to your point, that we're trying to not only meet people where they are, but also give them some understanding of what we're actually talking about. And that can be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a part of me, there's kind of the rebel part of me. Like, all right, there is only so much where you can meet people where they're at, right?
Mm.
Especially existing in kind of an era of untruth. It's very difficult for us all to even have a shared reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
alone be engage in dialogue in that space. I think we could dedicate an entire episode just to that.
Oh, yeah.
And feel in some ways like repro is the canary in the coal mine in that way, right? Because we've dealt with disinformation, who we are, what we do for so long. When I was, running my clinics directly, we say, I wish folks could just come here and see we are truly a regular doctor's office. I think there's so much fear mongering about
Mhm.
and what we do. There's all of this idea that it's very scary or heinous. There's a real demonization
Yeah.
of our work. And, folks who have come to us for care, folks who have and been to a Planned Parenthood know that there are some lovely, lovely humans here. I'm biased, but some of the loveliest humans here who are really genuinely dedicated and devoted to community in a deep way. The defensive thing you might see is a stylized picture of a uterus wall, right? It's really, truly just healthcare. And I think that we can break down fears and also, if not demonization, I don't even know that that's possible, right?
Mhm.
Reach that phase. Where do you go? Ultimately, a bad faith argument. But I think those folks that are maybe unsure or who don't see themselves as Planned Parenthood patients, who maybe don't see themselves part of the reproductive rights or state, can be moved by that kind of appeal to humanity and also by that normalization.
And let's talk about that appeal to humanity. So one thing that I think gets overlooked a lot of times in this conversation is how the abortion access, or the lack thereof, doesn't just impact the person seeking essential health care, but it goes beyond that, to our point earlier in the conversation. So how partners and families and caregivers and children and entire communities then experience the impact of that lack of reproductive health care access. Can you talk a little bit about the ripple effect that happens when people do not have bodily autonomy and access to care when they need it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in terms of people engaged at work, we have, I like to think about reproductive labor as, right?
Mhm.
It is, if you are someone who get pregnant, you are doing labor action in that space. And I think we've socially kind of become a little disconnected from that.
Mhm.
And, I even in my day life who are sick, who have, why should I pay for time with my tax dollars that I've never benefited from birth control? And I would laugh because I know they're sexually active and they most certainly have benefited from birth control, right? And so I think engaging everyone in this work and having that understanding around um, reproductive reality and how it affects us all, and tied to these pieces around healthier community, fewer maternal uh, or, lower maternal mortality,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so greater health for all. We are for everybody. And I think there is still a little bit that reproductive is for women, cis women in particular, white cis women in particular, right? And specifically that Planned Parenthood is for white cis women of a certain age group. But we are really coming strong with the message and putting the services behind it to say, we are for everybody, all gender identities, everyone who might have sexual reproductive health throughout their entire life, which is all of us. We're all there for them. And and that tie to the broader trickle down effects. I mean, it impacts every area of life. I think we can make a pretty strong relation to your point about patriarchal violence, right? Like we have a pretty strong correlation between what we see as this back in reproductive and this backslide in terms of bodily autonomy and this kind of regret pattern in the broader structure. Trad-wise, for instance, on reproductive health care vaccination, there are threats to contraceptive access. There are who are wastewater or product exception to try to prosecute people who have had miscarriages or, I mean, there's a really deep anger here of control and where our presence can really be, or our lack of presence can really be a bellwether around
Mhm.
this of marginalized general. And
No, I agree. As we wrap up, I know that, we're focused here on Western Pennsylvania and you have some things going on that you'd like to share with the community. That would be great if you'd like to let us know what's happening.
absolutely. Before I do that, I want to uplift. I know we've talked a lot about reproductive justice in this space. Nova Science Hub is a great resource for information and on reproductive justice work. So, if
Mhm.
you out, learn more. Please feel free. And Western Pennsylvania, we are just Parenthood, like all sexual health providers across the country, suffering from funding cuts, from regulatory restrictions. We are fighting all day, every day to care for our community. And so currently we have an up where folks can go, look at some really cool items and bid on them to help support the cause.
Great. You guys, I know, and Stephanie, I'm sorry, you're especially towards the second half, it was getting choppy. And Arlene, I'm glad you commented because I was worried it was just me. So just to reshare what you just said, you were talking about the silent auction that we have going on. And I'm going to post a link to that because all the money that goes to support Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania really does go to strengthen our communities at the end of the day, all of our communities. So I want to make sure that everybody will have access to be able to support the organization. I would love to have you back on and talk more. I know we just barely scratched the surface in this conversation, but I so appreciate you and your insights and your new role here at Western Pennsylvania's Planned Parenthood. Um, just as a final takeaway, what do you really want people to understand about the work being done in their own backyard that does impact not just them, but the next generations to come?
Absolutely. I think the one thing I would want folks to know is that we're not going away and we're not backing down, and we will be here for you as long as we are able. And your support makes all the difference. I would want people to know that, we fought long and hard for these rights. There's more work to do, but we don't want to go back. And we'll be here fighting that fight. And everyone is welcome at Parenthood. We're for everyone. Please, if you have the ability, particularly if you have private insurance or other means to use our services, that is so helpful for us to better serve our community.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thanks to everybody that joined. If you joined late, don't worry. I'm going to be posting this video shortly, and I will be adding those links so you can check out Planned Parenthood and support. And thank you, Billy, that this person says, appreciate everything you're doing. It's always nice to get a nice comment in the comments. And I have so many wonderful people that show up in the comments and share thoughtful insights and give their opinions. But a little love, Billy, goes a long way. So we thank you so much. Stephanie, thank you so much for being a part of Facts Over Fear. And as always, until next time, everyone, please take care of yourself and each other. Thanks, everybody.